Okay, well, hi, and welcome to Political Science 301, Introduction to Political Thought. I'm your professor, Lori Johnson, and I'm here to guide you through this 8-week summer session. And hopefully you've gotten started already. You've gotten a couple of emails from me, and I guess one of the first tips I can give you is to read those emails and to keep up with what you're supposed to do every day. In a class that's kind of compact, this is half the time of a regular semester, and also in a class that is during the summer when there's a lot of distractions, it's particularly important to keep up with what you're supposed to be doing every day and not sort of say to yourself, gee, I'll just do it all tomorrow. It just kind of gets harder and harder. And maybe that's especially true with an online course where it's a little bit easier to do that because you're not having to show up in a classroom every day. So you have to set aside a certain amount of time every day. You'll figure out how much you need. And be sure to do it right. Really do the readings. Really listen to the lectures, because that time that you spend doing that will not only make it easier for you to answer the questions in the long run that you're going to have to answer, but it's going to make it more interesting. And when things are more interesting, learning is a lot easier. So if you give yourself over to it and you say to yourself, yes, I am going to read Plato, and I can do it and I can get a lot out of it, then, you will end up enjoying it. You just have to kind of relax. If you've never read a Platonic dialogue, of course, as you know, that's our first assignment, to read Plato's Gorgias. And maybe like somebody said in the welcome comments, well, I've read Plato's The Cave, or the Allegory of the Cave, which is actually a selection from the Republic. And the Republic is a much longer book than the Gorgias, so you'll be glad of that. But it's Plato's most famous dialogue. Maybe some of the rest of you have read selections from the Republic, or even read the Republic at some point. And if that, a lot of students haven't read any Platonic dialogue at all, but maybe they've read about Plato at some point. But in a Gorgias, you probably, unless you took Dr. Griffith's speech class, you probably have never read Gorgias before, or maybe you probably never even heard of Gorgias before. But the reason why I select Gorgias for our first dialogue is because it is so relevant to our own regime, to the way that we do things here in the United States of America with our democratic republic. Now, Athens was a direct democracy, as you know probably from the lecture already. It's not the same as our type of democracy. In our democracy, it's really a republic is what we really ought to call it. We vote for representatives, and our representatives then go to Congress or to the State House, as the case may be, and they make decisions for us. And if we don't like those decisions, then 2 years or 4 years or 6 years from now, we have a chance to vote them out. The Athenians had direct democracy, meaning that they voted on issues. They got together as a group. Now they were just the adult Greek males, Athenian males, sons of Athenian mothers. But nonetheless, for those who were citizens and could vote, they voted directly on issues. Should we go to war with this country here? Should we spend this much money on our fleet? Should we build this building? Okay, so you get the point. Very different. And so in Athenian democracy, you see a sort of magnification of both the benefits and the drawbacks of democracy, and that's why we study it, okay? Now, Socrates, who's Plato's main character and was his real teacher in this dialogue, he's very critical of Athenian democracy. Doesn't mean that he's completely against it, because he realized that there are systems that are even worse than it. But nonetheless, he doesn't like it very much because it doesn't produce wise decisions, and it doesn't produce good character in the citizens. That's not the aim of a democracy. The aim of a democracy is for the majority to get whatever it is that they want, and what they want may be very ill-conceived. It may not be good for them. But he says in the Republic, nevertheless, the people in democracy often think of themselves as blessedly happy because they're free. But democracy has its drawbacks because of this aimlessness, relying upon the majority to figure out, or even the individuals within democracy for themselves to figure out how they want to live their lives, and they may be very misguided. And part of the way in which they are misguided is the real issue in Plato's Gorgias. Because as you will find out, the namesake of this book is Gorgias, who was a real-life philosopher. He was a rhetorician. Actually, Plato would object to calling him a philosopher. A rhetorician, a teacher of rhetoric. That's somebody who goes around and teaches young men, in his case, how to do public speaking, how to be successful as politicians, leaders of all kinds, and people who could win suits in the courts. And so he taught, in other words, how to use the language very well and how to be very persuasive. And, of course, that's the knowledge that you need to be powerful in a democracy, because then you can persuade the vast majority to do what you want. And so we've got Gorgias arguing with Socrates. We've got Polus, who's Gorgias's student and admirer, who wants to be like Gorgias and wants to be a very powerful person. And later on we have Callicles, who's even more realistic and more sort of power-hungry character, all of them arguing with Socrates. So I think that you will find this to be a very relevant dialogue, because you'll get to think about what really is it about even our democracy that causes people heartburn some of the time. Somebody else said in one of the comments that, you know, it seems like everybody's always down on politics. And why is that? You want to find out. Well, this dialogue will definitely tell you why. Now, should we be down on politics? Should we be down on democracy? I don't think so. But we do need to recognize it is not the best system. I know that's terrible to say in this country, but Plato says it is not the best system. The best system would be if the truly wise, who truly knew the very best thing to do all the time, the Solomon-like character, could possibly be in charge. Now, if you could have God in charge or Solomon in charge, you could be sure that every decision would be correct and would be the best for everybody. So that's the best system, and that's actually what he outlines in the Republic. But in this world, how often, if ever, will we get that kind of system? So that means that the other ones are, you know, the goodness and badness of these various regimes is relative, okay? Relative to the ideal. Plato is not a relativist, but he does understand that the ideal is here and can't be found anywhere in its perfection in the real world. And so you have to look at the relative goodness of these other regimes, and democracy has some benefits. We need to understand that democracy is not the best, that it has faults, that it has weaknesses, that it's susceptible to damage that can be done by people who want to use it for the wrong purposes, so that we can be better citizens, so that we can be better leaders, perhaps, if that's what you want to do someday, and do it right, and sort of fight against that tendency. You can never win, but you don't want to lose. So that's the Gorgias, and that's why we're reading it. It may seem kind of arcane at first. Why am I reading about these ancient figures with a far different type of culture in some ways than our own? But that's why. And by the way, those ancient figures with a very different culture than our own, they're actually, of course, pillars of our own culture. We, in some ways, at least intellectually, go back to the Greeks, and we can trace the development of Western intellectual thought from these ancients through the medieval and into the modern period, into the Enlightenment, and into postmodern even thought. And if you study more of this, you realize that a lot of the future political philosophers and philosophers are arguing with Plato. So it's well worth learning Plato. So that's what we're going to be doing. Just pay attention to the instructions. Really try to read that. Read it with a sense of humor. Use the study guide and my lectures to give you guidance as you go through this book so you're not on your own. And enjoy, and I'm looking forward to hearing your comments when I get on next Monday. I'm getting on at other times, but when I get on next Monday to look at the message board. All right, I'll see you then. Bye.